The forest has always been a place of mystery, where strange sounds echo through the trees, and those who enter sometimes don't return. From a vanished child deep in Siberia to a violent encounter on a Washington night patrol, in this video, we'll explore 6 chilling tales of people who entered the wild and came face to face with something they couldn't explain. These are the stories that challenge everything we think we know about what waits in the woods. The wind moved low and steady through the trees that night, thick with the weight of the taiga's silence. Deep in the Siberian wilderness, over 100 kilometers from the nearest village, the Sokolov family had pitched camp at the edge of a riverbank clearing. It was the kind of place only locals knew, dense, wild, ancient. Andrei and Elena Sokolova, both in their mid-30s, were experienced hikers from Novosibirsk. Their 6-year-old daughter Anya had begged for this trip, her first time sleeping in a tent away from city lights. That day, July 7th, 2025, had been warm. Anya had collected pine cones and skipped stones while her father set up camp, and her mother prepared food over the fire. The evening faded peacefully until it didn't. Sometime after midnight, Elena stirred. There was a sound, a slow, deliberate tapping, like wood knocking wood. It echoed faintly from the dark tree line across the fire's dying embers. She sat up, listening hard. The rhythmic knock came again, then silence. Thinking it might be a branch or an animal, she lay back down, but unease had lodged in her chest. Minutes passed. Then Andrei rose to check on Anya. Her small tent sat just 3 meters from theirs, its flap half open, shifting in the breeze. When he knelt and looked inside, his breath caught in his throat. The sleeping bag lay twisted and empty, still faintly warm. Her stuffed bear was gone. He shouted Elena awake. Panic surged through them as they tore through the surrounding brush, calling her name. Within minutes, their voices grew ragged with dread. By sunrise, they found something strange. Near the fire pit, Anya's small shoes had been placed in a perfect spiral, alongside 3 pine cones and a rusted spoon taken from their cookware bag. The pattern was unmistakable, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Then came the footprints. In the damp soil, leading from Anya's tent toward the tree line, were a series of massive, deep impressions. Each print was nearly twice the size of Andrei's boot, oddly shaped with a wide forefoot and no clear heel. They were spaced unusually far apart, as if made by long strides or leaps. The trail led straight toward the denser part of the forest and vanished beneath a towering cedar. Its bark had been torn away in fresh, jagged strips nearly 3 meters up. There was no blood, no drag marks, no other human tracks, not even signs of a struggle. By the time the emergency signal reached local authorities, hours had passed. A search team arrived by helicopter that afternoon, fanning out in all directions with dogs, drones, and thermal gear. For 3 days, they combed the forest. They found nothing, not a single shred of clothing, no scent trail, no remains, no broken branches suggesting a direction. The spiral by the fire and the towering gouge in the cedar were noted but not explained. The official theory, issued quietly on July 11th, was abduction by an unknown person. Authorities speculated that a human, possibly a forest hermit or fugitive, had taken the girl in the night. But no human tracks had ever been found, and there were no signs of forced entry, no tire prints, no campsite, no disturbed perimeter. It didn't add up. Locals from the nearest village who had traveled into the forest after hearing of the case offered a different explanation. Whispers passed from one mouth to the next, of enormous shadows moving through trees, of strange howls heard in the deep woods, of eyes glowing like amber in the dark. They said the forest had taken the child, or more precisely, something in the forest had. Andrei remained near the clearing for weeks after the search ended. He wandered beyond the cedars, armed only with a flashlight and a hunting knife. It was during one of those solo treks on July 24th that he found the second spiral. It was several kilometers from camp, placed in a mossy glade near a rock face. More pine cones, another rusted spoon, and in the center a piece of fabric, pink, with a tiny embroidered rabbit on it, part of Anya's pajamas. No blood, no tracks, just silence, broken only by the thrum of insects. He didn't tell the authorities. He told Elena, and she begged him to come home. But something had settled into his bones now, a need to know, even if it destroyed him. On July 30th, he returned to the site of the second spiral. This time, he brought a small tent and stayed overnight. What he described afterward, what he could barely form into words, never made it into any report. Around 3 a.m. he heard it, a long, guttural breathing from just beyond the trees. Not an animal panting or snorting, but something deliberate, almost curious. He froze inside his sleeping bag, gripping the knife. Then the breathing stopped. There was a low shuffle of movement, then a sudden pressure, like a hand, massive and steady, pressed against the tent wall. Not slashing, not striking, just pressing as if testing its strength, and then it was gone. By morning there were no tracks. Only a foul smell clung to the air, earthy and sour, like wet fur and rot. He packed up and left. Andre and Elena no longer speak publicly about the disappearance. They moved away from Novosibirsk and stopped responding to journalists. But in quiet forums online, people still discuss it. Some claim it fits a pattern: children missing in remote forests, spirals of natural objects, unexplained sounds in the night. Skeptics dismiss the account. They say the grief twisted their minds, that the footprints were misidentified, the spiral an accident, the bark gouges made by a bear or storm. But others believe. They point to the size of the prints, the absence of other tracks, the lack of evidence pointing to a human, the repeated patterns, the silence. What matters most, however, is this: a 6-year-old girl vanished in the middle of the night from a secure camp. No sign of struggle, no clear trail, only a spiral, footprints, and a line of broken hearts. And in the wild, untouched places where no path leads, something may still walk, tall, silent, and watching. Whether it mourns or celebrates, no one can say, but the forest remembers. The air in the Carpathian Mountains often grew colder than expected at night, even in late summer. And for Andrei Tanase, a quiet farmer nearing his 60th year, solitude had long become a companion rather than a burden. His farmhouse sat alone at the edge of a densely wooded slope outside a tiny village in Romania, and though the wind whispered constantly through the fir trees and the wolves sometimes howled in the dark valleys, he rarely felt fear on his land until the strange sounds began beneath his home. It started in late August 2024, with soft thuds beneath the floorboards, followed by subtle vibrations that ran up the wooden beams at odd hours of the night. At first, Andrei thought it was a trapped animal in the cellar, or perhaps the rumbling of old plumbing in the cracked infrastructure of his home. But as nights passed, the sounds grew stranger, less mechanical and more organic, as though something heavy and slow moved deliberately beneath the earth. One evening, just past midnight, Andre had come downstairs to fetch water when the air turned still, and he noticed the faint creak of a door he hadn't touched. The cellar door was ajar, though he hadn't opened it in weeks. Moving cautiously, his bare feet silent on the worn wooden floor, he leaned into the dark stairwell and froze. Something large shifted in the gloom below. He squinted into the darkness, and for only a second, a figure moved between the faint light shafts cast by the basement window. A towering shape, impossibly broad at the shoulders, coated in dark, matted hair that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. It moved without sound and disappeared behind the supporting beams before he could truly grasp what he was seeing. He stood there, heart thudding against his ribs, unable to breathe for several long seconds before forcing himself to descend. The basement, once filled with unused tools and crates, was undisturbed. There was no sign of the figure, nothing broken, no signs of entry. Shaken, Andre convinced himself that the mind could be cruel in the quiet, and perhaps the shadow had only been an illusion, the product of fatigue and imagination. But the next morning brought something he couldn't rationalize. While repairing a loose floorboard near the old stove, his boot struck a hollow pocket beneath the planks. Curious, he pried them up and discovered an aged, dust-caked trap door, sealed with rusted hinges. The door groaned when opened, revealing a narrow crawl space that smelled of wet earth and mold. With a flashlight clenched in his calloused hand, Andre descended into the void. The tunnel beneath his farmhouse stretched forward, barely tall enough for him to crouch. The walls were rough and damp, lined with moss and thin roots that hung like brittle hair. After several meters, the path opened into a small subterranean chamber that took his breath away. Not for its size, but for its unnatural stillness. The walls were lined with stone and clay, but more disturbingly, etched with markings. Long, looping carvings that seemed neither modern nor ancient, but alien in their precision. At the center of the chamber lay a bed of old leaves, crushed bones, and tufts of dark hair that matched nothing he had ever seen in the forests above. The place smelled of old decay, of something feral and wrong. His flashlight flickered, then steadied. When he backed out, breath tight and limbs trembling, the air outside felt heavier than before, as though the land itself now held its breath. That same day, Andrei found a trail of enormous barefoot footprints pressed deep into the soil near his goat enclosure. Each was over twice the size of his own, wide and flat, with long toe imprints that suggested no footwear, no claws, just immense bare feet. The tracks led from the edge of the forest to the back of the barn, then vanished at the base of a tree without continuing in any direction. Over the following weeks, the tension on the farm worsened. His goats, usually noisy and restless, grew quiet and huddled near the fence. Several hens went missing without any sign of a break-in. Then 2 of his sheep disappeared from a locked pen with no drag marks, no blood, no broken gates. The prints appeared again, always faint, always just outside the edge of the property, like a warning or a presence that refused to cross a certain boundary. Andrei slept poorly now, listening to every groan of the wind, every creak of timber, every shift of the soil beneath his bed. He boarded up the cellar door, spread salt along the trapdoor edges, and placed bells on the pens. But the unease remained, growing stronger with each passing night. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he felt it again, that soft thud beneath the boards, that weight shifting slowly in the hidden spaces below. He would sit upright in bed, holding his breath, too afraid to move, as if something was pacing just beneath the floor, mapping the contours of his home from within. He never saw the figure again, but the signs persisted. More livestock vanished. Fresh gouges appeared on trees near the fields, higher than any known animal could reach. Stones were stacked in odd shapes at the edge of his land, balanced impossibly, silently, deliberately. In late October, as the first frost clung to the grass, Andrei abandoned the farmhouse. He left behind the animals he could not sell or move, packed what little he could into his old truck, and drove away without a word to the neighbors. When asked later, he simply said the land had gone bad, that the silence no longer felt natural. He never returned to the farm, and no one bought the property. The village spoke of the place only in hushed tones, especially the children, who claimed to see tall shapes watching from the woods. What dwelled beneath his home may never be fully known, but something had claimed the earth there, something older than the stones, stronger than the roots, and quiet enough to pass through the soil without leaving a sound. The Appalachian Mountains had always drawn Mark and Lena with a promise of untouched wilderness and endless skies, a vast cathedral of trees and mist where their drones could capture the unseen angles of the ancient forest canopy. Both in their early 30s, the couple were seasoned drone photographers and adventurers from Asheville, North Carolina, well known for pushing boundaries and hunting the perfect shot in remote places. Their plan was to film a documentary about the deep woods and the interplay between nature and technology, a delicate dance in a world growing louder and busier. On September 14, 2023, they set out early, backpacks laden with gear, drones charged and ready, hearts full of anticipation. They left a camp at the edge of a clearing deep within the wilderness. It was a spot they had scouted days before and found perfect for aerial shots of towering pines and ancient hardwoods. The forest was dense, with trees so tall they vanished into the thick morning fog, and the air carried a cool dampness that clung to their skin. They spent hours navigating the forest floor, setting up their equipment, and launching drones to soar high above the treetops, capturing sweeping panoramas of green waves rippling across the mountains. As evening descended, their last drone flight circled the clearing where they camped, humming softly as it climbed higher and higher. Then the signal was lost, and the feed on their monitors broke into static, the screen flickering with interference. Mark and Lena didn't return that night. Days passed. Rescue teams combed the forest with flashlights, dogs, and GPS trackers, but the thick underbrush swallowed every trace. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of struggle. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, Then, on October 5th, a group of hikers stumbled upon a clearing a few miles from where the couple's last known location had been recorded. The scene was chilling. Mark and Lena lay side by side on the moss-covered ground, their bodies unnervingly still and pale, with no visible wounds or injuries. Their clothes were intact, their backpacks untouched, but their eyes were wide open, staring blankly upward at the canopy. It was the vacant, unblinking stare of someone who had seen beyond the veil, frozen in the moment of final shock. Nearby, 3 drones hung tangled and broken from the branches of towering pines, their rotors bent and cracked, their camera lenses clouded with moisture. The drones had been arranged in an almost deliberate display, dangling like offerings or trophies, as if whatever had taken the couple wanted to send a message. Around the clearing, pressed deeply into the soft earth, were footprints unlike any seen before in the region. Each was over 20 inches long, barefoot, with an elongated shape and wide toes splayed outward. The impressions were deep and clear, indicating heavy weight, and circled the clearing in a rough pattern, as if enclosing the victims in an invisible cage. The authorities who arrived soon after were baffled. Initial theories ranged from animal attack to foul play, but no other evidence supported either claim. The forest floor showed no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, no blood, and no other tracks beyond the massive prints. No human scent was detected, and even the dogs refused to enter the clearing. The drones were recovered, but their memory cards were damaged beyond use. Whatever had been recorded was unrecoverable, erased by moisture, impact, or something else unknown. Investigators found no useful data, and the strange arrangement of the drones only deepened the mystery surrounding the couple's final moments. Locals from nearby communities whispered warnings about the silent watchers, shadowy beings rumored to haunt the oldest forests. Entities said to be protective guardians of the land that punished those who intruded too deeply or disturbed sacred places. Stories told of strange lights, mysterious disappearances, and technology failing inexplicably in certain parts of the forest, all dismissed by outsiders but carefully passed on among those who lived closest to the mountains. Since the discovery of Mark and Lena's bodies, the clearing has become a place few dare approach. Hikers speak of an unsettling feeling in the area, an oppressive silence that smothers the usual sounds of the forest, a presence that seems to watch unseen from the dense woods. Compass needles spin wildly, GPS signals drop, and drones flown near the site lose signal almost immediately. Some say the forest itself has grown alive, shifting and pulsing in ways impossible to explain, protecting its secrets with an intelligence far beyond human understanding. Others believe the Silent Watchers are not merely legends, but something real, something vast and ancient that moves without sound, invisible yet ever present. The fate of Mark and Lena remains a mystery tangled in shadow and static, a silent warning carved into the earth by invisible feet, and a chilling testament to the dangers lurking in the quiet, waiting spaces of the wild. For those who seek to understand, the forest offers only silence, watchful, endless, and merciless. The air inside the uncharted Missouri cave hung heavy with dampness and the smell of earth, thick with the scent of ancient stone and cold moisture that seeped from cracks unseen. In October of 2019, Aaron McCall, a 32-year-old geologist with a keen eye for detail and a patient mind honed by years of careful study, adjusted his headlamp as he and his companion, Dustin Price, a rugged 35-year-old spelunker with muscles built for climbing and nerves steel strong, pressed further into the twisting darkness of the newly discovered system beneath Arkansas's dense forest. Their goal had been clear: map the cave's hidden passages, document its formations, and bring back something never before seen by human eyes. But what awaited them was far more unsettling than rock or sediment. They had spent hours crawling through narrow tunnels, their progress slow and deliberate, voices kept low to preserve the eerie silence that seemed to soak into the walls themselves. Water dripped steadily from stalactites overhead, forming tiny pools in the silt-covered floor, while their boots left faint impressions in the damp earth. The further they moved, the colder the air became, and the deeper their light penetrated, the more oppressive the darkness seemed to grow. Somewhere in the vast blackness ahead, a noise began to emerge, a slow, steady rhythm that did not match the natural sounds of water or wind. It was breathing, measured and heavy, reverberating faintly off the rock walls, almost as if the cave itself had taken a breath, then exhaled. Aaron paused, his heart pounding unevenly in his chest, and turned toward Dustin, who nodded grimly, both of them understanding the unspoken question. Was this another human presence? Another team exploring these depths? Or something else entirely? They called out, their voices low but firm, announcing their presence, expecting a reply or at least movement. But the breathing ceased immediately, as if the sound had been listening and stopped when disturbed. Silence returned, denser than before, pressing around them like a physical weight. Driven by a mix of curiosity and caution, they pressed on toward where the sound had come from, their steps slow and deliberate on the uneven floor. The tunnels opened briefly into a small chamber, irregularly shaped, strewn with scattered bones of animals long dead, rabbits, deer, and other woodland creatures that had likely fallen or been dragged here over time. What caught their attention most, however, was the single massive footprint embedded clearly in the damp silt near the chamber's center. The print was unlike any known animal or human foot, over 18 inches long and nearly as wide, with toes splayed outward in an unnatural curve. Its edges were sharply defined, pressed deeply as though made by a weight far beyond what either man could imagine. They crouched to examine it, Aaron's fingers tracing the outline carefully, while Dustin scanned the shadows beyond with his flashlight. The print held the chill of untouched earth, fresh despite the cave's isolation, and it whispered of something unknown lurking in the depths. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the stillness, a rattling of pebbles sliding down a slope just beyond the chamber's edge, followed by the barely perceptible scrape of something moving quickly out of sight. The light flickered as both men swung their torches toward the noise, but nothing answered their gaze. Unease bloomed inside them, sharp and immediate, as though they had crossed an invisible boundary and awoken something better left sleeping. The breathing had not resumed, but the sense of presence lingered, thick and watchful. They rose slowly, aware of every footfall echoing against the stone walls, and retraced their path toward the cave entrance, their minds racing with questions and unspoken fears. Outside, the familiar world of sunlight and rustling leaves felt impossibly distant, as if the darkness inside had marked them in some permanent way. When they emerged, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, and the cool evening air offered no comfort from the chill that had settled deep in their bones. Neither spoke much on the drive back to town, the silence heavy with the weight of what they had seen and what they had not. In the days that followed, rumors began to circulate in the small mountain communities surrounding the cave. Stories of strange noises echoing through the night, of shadows glimpsed near the entrance, and of unexplainable disturbances in the local wildlife stirred old legends of creatures stalking the underworld of the Ozarks. The authorities dismissed the claims quickly, suggesting the sounds had been the wind through the rocks or the hooting of owls, while the bones in the cave were identified as normal animal remains deposited by natural causes. They also proposed the footprint might have been a prank by other explorers, or simply an unusual geological impression. Yet neither Aaron nor Dustin returned to the cave, and neither spoke openly of their experience beyond vague references to strange noises and something unusual. Nights brought restless sleep, haunted by the rhythm of slow breathing echoing in the dark, the memory of the print's sharp edges, and the feel of eyes watching just beyond the reach of their flashlights. Aaron became obsessed with the possibility that whatever was inside the cave was aware of them, listening, calculating, waiting. He described the breathing as too precise to be natural, too rhythmic to be random, like a deliberate signal or warning. Dustin, more practical by nature, struggled to reconcile the experience with his years of spelunking, but even he admitted to sleepless nights and a growing dread of descending into darkness again. Their maps remained incomplete, and the notes they left on the cave's entrance warned others away, scribbled in urgency and fear. The footprint's size alone defied explanation, too large for any known animal or human, and too fresh to be ancient. It became a symbol of something hidden beneath the earth, something not yet understood, but palpably real. Though the cave remains officially open for exploration, local guides refuse to take groups inside, and the surrounding forest has grown quieter, as if the very land itself had withdrawn from human curiosity. For Aaron and Dustin, the memory of that breath in the dark is a permanent scar, a reminder that some places harbor secrets better left untouched, and some watchers dwell in silence, unseen but unforgotten. The wilderness of the Olympic Peninsula stretched out in an unbroken sea of ancient trees and tangled undergrowth, a place where the mist clung thick and cold to moss-covered trunks, and the silence carried the weight of centuries long past. A vast, untamed wilderness that had remained mostly untouched by human hands. Daniel Hayes was no stranger to such places. At 42 years old, a survival expert with years of experience navigating hostile environments around the world, he had long sought solitude in wild places to test his skills and document nature's raw beauty. But the dense forests of the Olympic Peninsula, with their deep shadows and secrets, offered something far beyond the trials he expected. He set out alone in early October 2022, his backpack carefully packed with essentials, water purification tools, a hunting knife, a sturdy tarp, and his most trusted possession, a weathered leather journal that had accompanied him on countless expeditions. Daniel was a methodical man, taking meticulous notes and sketching whenever he paused, often for hours, to rest and observe. His plan was to spend several weeks traversing remote parts of the peninsula, mapping forgotten trails, tracking wildlife, and capturing the essence of solitude away from civilization's noise. For a time, the journey went as expected. He moved steadily through thick forests, sleeping under the canopy, hunting small game, and recording his observations with careful precision. But as the weeks passed, the tone of his journal began to shift. His sketches became darker, filled with enormous footprints that dwarfed his own boots, twisted and gnarled trees whose branches curled in unnatural arcs, and strange symbols repeated over and over in swirling patterns that defied recognition. These images were accompanied by short, cryptic notes, the handwriting becoming erratic and rushed as days wore on. Words like watcher, silence, and darkness appeared frequently, and on the final page a single chilling line was scrawled with trembling urgency. It watches without sound. The ink smudged in places, as though written in haste or fear, and the page was stained with faint marks that could have been tears or rain. When Daniel failed to return on schedule, search and rescue teams launched a thorough investigation, combing the dense forests for any sign of him. After 6 weeks, they found his camp abandoned, a haunting tableau of absence and mystery. The fire pit was cold, the ashes gray and undisturbed, his supplies untouched and neatly stacked as if left in haste or despair. His tent sagged in the damp undergrowth, the flaps fluttering in the wind, the ground around it bearing no footprints or signs of struggle. Close to the campsite, investigators discovered patches of coarse dark fur snagged on broken branches and thorny bushes. At first glance, it resembled the hair of local black bears, but further examination revealed subtle but distinct differences. The fur was thicker, longer, and darker than anything found in the region, with a strange sheen that almost caught the morning sunlight unnaturally. The texture was coarse and wiry, more like the hair of a wild beast beyond known species. Authorities were quick to attribute the fur to bears, dismissing the journal's sketches and notes as the product of isolation-induced hallucinations and stress. They suggested Daniel likely succumbed to starvation, exposure, or psychological breakdown in the unforgiving wilderness. The journal was withheld from public view, deemed too disturbing and potentially inciting unnecessary fear. However, among locals living near the forest's edge, the story took on a life of its own. Whispers spread of an ancient silent watcher that had roamed the Olympic forest long before settlers arrived, a creature of shadow and patience lurking just beyond human perception. They spoke of footprints too large to belong to any known animal, trees bent and twisted with unnatural intent, and strange symbols carved into bark in patterns that seemed to pulse with unseen meaning. These tales had been passed down through generations, dismissed by many, but Daniel's journals seemed to confirm their fears. The footprints he drew were enormous, far beyond the size of any bear or mountain lion, and their shape was unlike any known species, wide and flat with long, splayed toes pressed deeply into the earth. The twisted trees appeared deliberately deformed, their branches arcing in ways that seemed almost architectural rather than natural growth. The cryptic symbols repeated throughout the journal resembled nothing in any known alphabet or language, and their repetition suggested some form of communication or marking, possibly a claim of territory or a warning. Those who studied the journal privately admitted to a creeping unease, sensing that the forest harbored more than the usual dangers of wildlife and weather. They found no logical explanation for the fur's unusual texture or the perfectly preserved footprints, and the symbols remained a mystery beyond the reach of linguists and cryptographers. In the weeks following the discovery, hikers and hunters who ventured near Daniel's last known location reported strange and unsettling experiences. Some spoke of broken branches arranged in deliberate patterns, balanced piles of rocks and twigs that seemed too precise to be random. Others described fleeting shadows glimpsed just beyond the tree line or the sensation of being watched by something vast and unseen. GPS devices malfunctioned, and electronic compasses spun wildly, as if the forest itself resisted intrusion. Most who encountered these phenomena chose silence, fearing disbelief or mockery. Yet the fear lingered, and the forest remained an unwelcoming place, shrouded in a growing aura of menace. Daniel's journal remains locked away in government archives, its pages hidden from the public eye. The sketches, the fur, and the eerie symbols endure as haunting reminders of the wilderness's mysteries, forces ancient and patient, watching silently from the shadows, waiting beyond human understanding, beyond explanation, and beyond reach. Samuel Cross had spent nearly 2 decades patrolling the endless forests of Washington's Pacific Northwest, a rugged expanse where towering evergreens stretched into thick, misty skies, and the air was always heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. At 48, he was a veteran park ranger, hardened by years of hiking remote trails, guiding lost hikers to safety, and standing watch over a wilderness that was as beautiful as it was unforgiving. He had grown accustomed to the strange sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the calls of nocturnal animals, even the distant howl of predators. But on the night of November 16, 2024, Samuel faced something he could neither explain nor forget. The day had been uneventful, filled with routine checks and paperwork. But as dusk settled over the thick canopy, a series of reports from campers and hikers trickled in, describing deep, guttural noises that echoed unnervingly through the dark woods. The sounds were unlike any animal Samuel had heard before, low, harsh, and oddly rhythmic, as if some massive creature was communicating in the shadows. By 11 p.m., Samuel was dispatched to investigate, gripping his flashlight and service pistol as he moved carefully along a narrow, winding dirt path that cut through the dense forest. The air was cold and damp, the kind that seeps into bone and clothes, and the fog had thickened, wrapping the trees in ghostly veils. His breath came out in white puffs, the sound sharp in the stillness. The usual forest chorus was muted tonight. No birds sang, no small animals rustled in the underbrush, and the distant creek gurgled faintly as a ghostly backdrop. Samuel's boots crunched softly against fallen leaves and twigs as he advanced, every sense alert, scanning the darkness beyond his flashlight's narrow beam. The tall firs and cedars rose like silent sentinels, their massive trunks disappearing into the thick shadows overhead. The path twisted sharply to the left, and the guttural sounds grew louder, vibrating through the cold night air. Suddenly, the radio clipped and crackled in his jacket pocket, then died with a harsh, final burst of static. Samuel froze, pressing the button again, but only silence met his frantic attempts to contact dispatch. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed the signal, leaving him isolated in the vast darkness. A cold shiver ran down his spine as the noises abruptly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. His heartbeat quickened as he scanned the trees, the beam of his flashlight trembling slightly in his gloved hands. Without warning, the forest exploded in movement. A massive shape crashed through the undergrowth, the force of it shaking the earth beneath Samuel's feet. Branches snapped like brittle bones, and the heavy thud of a huge body barreled toward him. Samuel tried to react, but the impact hit him like a freight train, sending him sprawling to the ground with a jarring crash. Pain exploded in his ribs, sharp and relentless, the sensation of broken bones pressing into flesh with every shallow breath. Dazed, he struggled to raise his flashlight, his vision swimming as the monstrous form loomed in the weak circle of light. He saw it then, an enormous arm, thickly covered in dark fur that gleamed faintly in the flashlight's beam. The fingers were grotesquely long, far too long for any bear or known creature, tipped with blunt, claw-like nails that scraped bark as the arm retracted swiftly into the shadows between the towering trees. The sheer size of the limb was overwhelming, muscular and powerful, the kind of strength no ordinary animal could wield. Pain surged through Samuel's side as he scrambled to his feet, heart hammering in his chest. Instinct drove him to draw his pistol, shaking as he fired a single warning shot into the cold night air. The crack echoed loudly, yet after the shot, the forest fell into an unnatural silence. All movement ceased, every creature seemed to vanish, and the usual rustle of leaves stilled as if the woods themselves held their breath. Samuel leaned heavily against a tree, clutching his injured ribs, listening for any sign of the creature's return. But only the wind whispered through the needles overhead, and the shadows remained still, empty, and vast. When backup finally arrived 45 minutes later, their flashlights swept over a haunting scene. The ground around Samuel's patrol route was marked by deep footprints pressed into the soft, damp earth, barefoot impressions over 20 inches long, spaced wide apart as if made by a creature with massive strides. The prints encircled the site in a rough pattern, some overlapping others, and vanished abruptly beneath a carpet of fallen leaves and moss. Medical teams rushed Samuel to the nearest hospital, where X-rays confirmed 2 fractured ribs. The physical pain was sharp and immediate, but the psychological wound cut deeper. Despite official reports attributing the attack to a bear, common in these woods, the evidence did not fit. The creature's fingers were too long, the footprints too large and barefoot, with no claw marks to suggest a bear's involvement. The raw power and precision of the attack pointed to something else, something unknown and terrifying. Samuel's resignation came the following morning, handing in his badge with steady hands but hollow eyes. He refused to return for another night shift, unwilling to face the forest's dark embrace again. His colleagues respected his decision but shared worried glances, haunted by the unexplained and the dread lingering in the air around the patrol site. The forest itself seemed changed. The area around the attack was quietly closed off, warnings posted to keep hikers and campers away. Locals whispered of sightings, massive shadowy figures glimpsed between the trees, footprints too large for any bear, and strange guttural sounds echoing through the night like the growls of something ancient and restless. Samuel rarely spoke of that night, but when he did, his voice was low and tense, haunted by the image of those enormous fingers reaching out from the darkness and the crushing force that knocked him down. The memory of the cold, heavy breath felt more than heard, the sensation of eyes watching him from just beyond his flashlight's reach, and the overwhelming silence that followed his warning shot. That night patrol marked a turning point, not only in Samuel's life but in the uneasy relationship between humans and the wilderness they thought they understood. The forests of the Pacific Northwest remained vast and wild, filled with shadows that moved beyond the edges of light, inhabited by secrets as old as the trees themselves, waiting patiently for those who dared to listen.